Thank you very much, Pastor. I did not realize that while the pastor was praying, or prior to his starting the prayer, he had noticed the Baptistic way people are sitting. And he has kindly requested that we use the first two rows, this to my left, immediate left, and this to my immediate right. So, Reverend Akinola and Co., who are seated that way, that wonderful couple, please come here. Deacon Oyato, I appreciate your mobilization, but I also will further appreciate your having your seat so that you can remain an example of one that is obedient. Many a times we ask ourselves or we ponder about what is happening in our communities, in our states, and even in our different countries. Especially when we believe that as Africans in particular, we are very godly and religious. This challenge has never at any point in time gone unnoticed. And I guess this thinking or questioning will always be a debate. What have we not gotten right? Why can't we seem to be getting things right? But because we all belong to this household of faith or body of Christ, we then begin to worry about why is it that we who profess to be Christians in particular have not been making the desired difference or differences in our respective communities. A few years ago, in Ikoyi Baptist Church, we had a group that graduated from the discipleship program, and they were challenged to become more community relevant and not see Christianity just from a very salvation and selfish perspective, but to want to take what they have learned into the community. And they had then proposed to have a job portal because addressing unemployment to them was a critical issue. I guess it still is today. In one of the discussions, beyond that group, indeed at a church council meeting, we then collectively took a resolve as a church to look inwards, to move outwards, which means let's harness talents, gifts, resources, goodwill, professional capacities, and the rest, and align them with Christ-like values. This led to the birth of the business and career fair. So it's our unique platform. And I keep saying to people, that intersection where we bring Christianity into every aspect of our life. There is no isolation between who you should be in church or the church community and who you should be in the workplace. And then to get to know what we are all doing. To earn a decent living as Christians legally in our respective spaces. And therefore, thoughts don't just remain. They continue to find root. It's just like a big tree that starts with its root deepening and all of that. So today, we are having an evening with the CEO, and therefore I will invite my good friend and sister. I can't introduce you, or should I? Shaliwa Fajobi, who will take us now into the rest of the evening. Thank you. A round of applause for her.
So following from where Dr. Eshet stopped this evening, we are privileged to have in our midst an individual who has practiced the different aspects, different principles of leadership and governance while working in the most volatile business environments across Africa. Prior to his current position, he served as the Managing Director for Nigeria from 2014 to 2016 and Managing Director Unilever East and Southern Africa from 2010 to 2013. He was at one time the Strategic Assistant to the President and Unilever Executive Member for Asia, Africa, Central and Eastern Europe. At various times in the past, he has been the Marketing Director and Executive Board Member for Unilever Ghana, as well as serving in several other roles in South Africa and Ghana. He's an executive member of a number of trade, employee associations, and strategic private sector committees in Nigeria. Our guest CEO this evening is also a member of the Board of Advisors of the Lagos Business School. He's the chairman of the Diversity and Inclusion Board for Unilever Africa, and he represents Africa on the Unilever Global Diversity and Inclusion Board. He's an associate member of the Ghana Institution of Engineers, a director of Changing Lives Endowment Fund in Ghana, and a former director of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers and chairman of the East African Shippers Council. He holds an honors degree in chemical engineering from the University of Science and Technology, Kumasi in Ghana, and a postgraduate diploma in management from Henley Management College, United Kingdom. He is right now the Executive Vice President of Unilever Ghana, Nigeria. Please join me in welcoming very warmly Mr. Yaw Nsarkoh. He will take us through a presentation during which I'm expecting that you will note your questions, and after the presentation, he will answer them.
Okay, the more I thought about it while sitting down, I thought I should take away all the barriers so that we can just speak community to community. So first, thanks to the organizers of the Ikoyi Baptist Church Business and Careers Fair. I have to say, when Wem first told me to speak, I was not so sure because he's always trying to get me into something. But when he explained it the more to me, I said, well, I will come and share some thoughts, and I look forward more to the questions, to the comments, to the interventions that many people will have, because you have a room of varied experience. And what tends to happen is that it's difficult to locate exactly where you are going to speak. So I will set a broad context of what we need to talk about, and then look forward to the specific questions and interventions. And what I'll be trying to do here is not to unload a whole series of theoretical concepts. I'll be talking more about my own journey and hoping that that will trigger points of conversation as we go forward. So thanks to everybody who has made it through Lagos traffic to be here on time. I suspect that some more people will come. I could see that there was some unusual traffic as we were coming, so I understand that these are the things that we live with. Many of you can see because I will be using charts, even though there's not so much on them, but I just want to check that you are positioned in a place where you can see the charts. So the first thing is that I was asked to speak in the context of Christian leadership. That's not so much reflected in the theme, but that's the context that was given to me to talk about some of the challenges that you face. And I thought I would begin by saying that whatever you see your faith as, and I tend to believe that every human being, even when they say they are atheists, every human being has a system of faith. I had a boss once who used to say to me that the very principle of science, mathematics, theoretical physics, depends on infinity. If you take away the concept of infinity, all calculations around quantum physics and so on collapse. And yet there is no scientist alive who can define infinity. What is this infinity that we can never get to? That when you make it a reciprocal, you get to zero, but you can never get to it. If you put an exponential factor on infinity, it is still infinity. It's a system of representation. It is something that scientists have embraced as an article of faith, not as an article of empirical determination. And so when we start out by saying that everybody has some sort of faith, it is a statement that I think is evidenced by all of life. And it is from your system of faith that you derive values. So those of us who are gathered here today and who are speaking in a Christian context, if we are sincere about our faith, if we are not just adherents of a religious, ritualistic set of practices, but if we are sincere and we try to grow ourselves spiritually, then what would have happened is that it is that faith that determines your values. And that's what must give you the context that goes into the workplace. What is right and what is wrong, a lot of the time comes down to what your faith system is. That's why in many societies where faith as a system collapses totally, they get into logical arguments and then all sorts of things that were unimaginable when more rational bases of looking at things take hold, start to take place in the society. You have debates about whether a person should be able to kill themselves when they feel like it, because for us, how will we conclude? If we have that conversation, we will say life is in the hands of God. So if you don't believe in God, then you have no barrier. I'm using that as an example. So I want to locate the conversations that we are going to have in that context of values that are derived from our common Christian faith and the challenges therein that emerge when you're running a business in real life. As you know, the Christian faith casts out ideals. It sets out ideals that we are supposed to strive to get to with the help of all the agencies that the Bible describes, but it does not set us out as people who are perfect. There are so many references in the Bible, and that's the context that I would want to use. So from that, from the fact that there are values, there are some things that are basic, that sometimes we don't reflect on at a deep philosophical level. We say, for example, that human beings are created in the image of God. It is a cardinal principle of the Christian faith that we believe this. But if you believe that human beings are created in the image of God, then necessarily by extension you have to believe in the equality of all human beings. Human being qua human being. Rich, poor, whatever. The fact of the common humanity of human beings is something that you must embrace. And it's a very important principle if you are leading, and if you are leading in the context of Christian direction, that you go into the workplace believing that passionately. That whoever it is, however junior or however senior, there's an egalitarian principle that binds them all together in the eyes of God, which is essentially that they are human beings, they are all carriers of the image of God, and therefore they must all be treated with dignity. That's one such value that emerges from the context that we have just described. It is also very important, particularly in the modern day, because I don't want to go on too much about sophisticated ideological systems and so on, but many of you who work in the market economy, many of you who have short-term, quarterly cycles, things that you need to deliver, know that after a period of time, if you are not careful, you burn out because you ask yourself every day, is this what life is about? And I've often said to people in my own set of circumstances, if I woke up and the only thing that appeared to be a purpose to me was that I'm trying to sell another box of washing powder, I would have given up a long time ago. So it's extremely important for the leader, but also for the led, that they ensure that they are clear what their purpose is. And it has to be something that is bigger than them, something that ideally does more for people than just the selfish ambition of meeting your own targets. In my own case, very early in my career, it took some time to articulate in that way, but very early in my career, because I have worked in a global business, I was very clear that I wanted to be an example of excellence from Africa anywhere in the globe that I went. And when I say excellence, I take advantage to explain a few things that I hold on to passionately. I believe passionately that there's only one definition of excellence in the world. The idea that barriers are lowered for people when you come from a continent like Africa is one that I do not subscribe to. I think we have all the faculties of humanity that everybody else has, and there's a definition of excellence that is world-class, and that's what we must strive for. And that has been my purpose. So wherever I am put, whatever I am meant to do, I think about the long-term consequence of what I achieve must move the African community in the global system forward. That gives me something to look at when I am in a situation where things are very difficult and I'm tempted to give up. If you're just thinking about the next day's sales or the next month's sales, you will give up. There will be many challenges that come: economic collapse, economic downturn. Sometimes you don't achieve your targets. But you have to define for yourself what that purpose is. No one can do it for you. You have to read deep into yourself. What are your values? What is your faith system? What exactly are you trying to achieve and touch? And call that out for yourself, because it becomes your true north, or others call it the magnetic north. So being purpose-driven, we talk about it a lot in my company, Unilever, but it is essential in my own experience for keeping you focused on what you're trying to achieve. Pursue a multi-stakeholder approach. It should be self-evident. But the trajectory of capitalism over a long period of time has led us to a place where in some systems, profits have become a deity. The shareholder return is the only thing that everybody talks about. But the original concept of business emerged from somebody spotting a problem. When the butcher first said that I will be a butcher, it is because they recognized that there was somebody who wanted to buy meat and not everybody could be a hunter. And the baker, and so on and so forth. So the first thing that people tried to do was to solve a human problem. You take care of somebody, you make a little bit of a reward for it, and all of society is better. What then happened to modes of capitalism without governance is that we started a race to the bottom. Everybody trying to maximize shareholder return, no values context. People would chase profits at any cost, even if it meant that they were killing people to do so. I was reading a case yesterday from China where pharmaceutical companies were making counterfeit drugs simply because it gave them more margin, killing people in order that they will be able to make their numbers. Sometimes it was not outright counterfeit. Sometimes they had diluted the potency of the drugs. In fact, recently I was also reading another article that was talking about how big pharmaceutical companies, and I'm not against big companies, I work for one, but big pharmaceutical companies had dented the conversation of medical science so much that people were no longer even interested in the root causes of what was causing illness. So if somebody had some stress source that they had not taken away and that was manifesting as illness or some rashes or something, because of the need for people to meet targets, medication is given. People don't sit down to say, what exactly is happening to you? Maybe you don't need medicine, let's talk about it. And I've used examples from the pharma industry, but I bet you in any industry that we are, you can find the equivalencies. To my mind, the multi-stakeholder approach has to be automatically the way that Christians go. Because it cares about community. It recognizes that the shareholder must be looked after because they've put money in a business, but that the shareholder is not the only consideration. There are customers, there are suppliers, there are employees, there are communities, and businesses only thrive in thriving communities. That's why today you hear so much about sustainability. For a long period of time, many people did not care about the ecological consequences of what they did so long as they made money. They did not care about the environmental impact of what they did so long as they made money. But that's a very short-term way of looking at things. At the end of the day, if you're taking a multi-stakeholder approach, then you realize that we're living in an organic ecosystem. Everybody in that ecosystem matters, and the best way to win is to ensure that all the actors, everybody who is involved, is deriving some value from the activity. Then the entire system becomes stronger. I'll give you one example from my own experience in Nigeria. For years, we struggled to get our consumer products into very deep rural areas. And then learning from something that was done in India, we started what is called the Shakti model in deep rural areas in 3 states in Nigeria. We went to peasants. They had never worked before. These were all women. They had never earned an income before. But using the microfinance logic, community pressures, they selected who they were going to work with. We said, we'll give you 3 months of stock. There is no interest charged on it. If you are able to sell it, you make a margin on it, and then you pay your principal. But the margin that you make on is for you, but at least you have a principal, so you get something going. I often cite this as an example to people who say to me, you can't trust poor people. Nobody ever defaulted on this. And then people say it's the rural poor. Okay, let's limit it that it's the rural poor. But by empowering these women economically, and they're not making money that is going to make them Jeff Bezos, but when they tell you their stories, there's one woman who was saying to me, she had to borrow 150 naira to be able to get transportation to come for the interview. While she was at the interview, she was called and told that her son was being thrown out of school for 1,500 naira deficit in fees. And since she started this, neither of the 2 instances have reoccurred. For her, while it's not a huge amount of money, she's escaped a certain degree of impoverishment that gives her hope, that puts her son back in school, and it is from that process that the entire family may escape poverty. What does it then do for business? Our goods are now being sold in parts of Nigeria that we were never able to get to. So we win because our volumes are going up. They win because they're economically empowered. The customers are happier because their distribution goes deeper. The suppliers are happy because the volume requirement goes end. And if you have models like that, you are sure to be relevant to the community. But if you think about it in isolated and restricted models, in only ways where you alone can profit, then a lot of the time the system collapses. And you do not understand why the system collapsed. It's because you didn't look after the community. So the multi-stakeholder approach is, for me, central to how businesses should do things, but it is also, in my view, very well located in the idea of caring for your neighbor, which is very much also located in the Christian way of looking at life. So if you are not pursuing a multi-stakeholder approach and you have surrendered to some of these short-term predatory capitalist ways of looking at life, I think that you just need to reconsider whether that's the best way to go. For me? Yeah, okay. Now the key thing, I got the impression when I was speaking to Wem, that he really wanted me to talk about a lot, is to say that we work in an environment where we have challenges on governance and on controls, and we could spend a whole lot of time talking about corporate governance, and everybody knows that. When you talk about the theory and the concepts of corporate governance, there's so many aspects. The thing is, why do we not improve? Why is it still an issue? Why do we talk so much about corruption? I'll share my own views. I think in a lot of the conversations about this, we try to reach individuals and we try to talk to personalities and say that they should undergo a road to Damascus conversion. All of a sudden, one day they become new people. That dimension of things is important. But I believe very passionately that if you're going to build an organization that has proper governance, it must rely on management systems, not necessarily on personalized power and discretionary power. Because discretionary power is a very dangerous thing. It brings temptation to many leaders. There is too much power in one hand, and wherever there is concentration of power, there is a chance that things will fall apart. So depersonalizing power, which is not always easy to do. When I came to Nigeria, all appointments that I wanted to make, I could make. Anybody I wanted to move in the organization, I could move. And I kept saying to myself, so what happens if I am wrong? What is going to happen to me when it's my friend who needs to be moved over somebody who is not my friend? And thinking about that, we created what we call the Appointments Forum. It had to mean that I was decreasing my influence. Today, as the CEO of Unilever, I cannot make an appointment on my own. I cannot. Because it goes to the Appointments Forum where all my directors are sitting. But not just can I not make an appointment alone or a promotion alone, nobody on my leadership team can. We have an Appointments Forum, we all sit down. If you feel that somebody should be promoted, you tender it, you argue the case, and if people disagree, then they disagree and it cannot pass. By doing so, we have built more credibility for ourselves as a leadership because the outcomes of the process of getting more people involved has led to a meritocracy. Now, I do not believe that on the long term, you can build a business that is not abiding by what I call meritocratic principles. And so the key thing in this area is to depersonalize power. The idea of the big man, the strong man that can take all decisions, always think about how you take some of that influence into a system and how that system is governed with criteria. And for me, that's what all controls and corporate governance at the end of the day are about. Discretionary power is likely to travel as far as it will go. Montesquieu said many years ago that if you put too much discretionary power into people's hands, temptations will eventually come, and however diligent they try to be, occasionally they will slip. So it's crucially important that you put systems that breed transparency. Systems breed transparency, management reports that breed transparency. Transparency takes away over-concentration of power because everybody knows what is going on. And for me, transparency generates a meritocracy. And it's in the context of a meritocracy that people give their very best. When people feel that there are egalitarian circumstances, if they give their best, the system is going to reward their best. And then they are going to give their best and it becomes a virtuous cycle. So this is the main message that I want to leave. In big organizations like mine, these come instinctively. The challenge comes when you have set up your own business and somebody is saying to you, haven't taken the risk, haven't put your own money in, the option of putting systems so that all power is not in your hands alone is the better one. It's very difficult to abide by that. And when you come from a context like we come, I'm from West Africa as well, a system knows when you're all powerful and there's no management system, everybody starts to worship you. And they start to second guess you. They give you the feedback that they think you want to hear, and all your feedback loops collapse. There is no system, none, on earth that can survive and thrive without a feedback system. So the idea of transparency is to make sure that the person who is running the organization, the leaders of the organization, they have a feedback loop. Because none of us is infallible. Our weaknesses need to be pointed out, and sometimes it only comes out because people are willing to give us the feedback and they're willing to have the arguments with us. I deliberately put dysfunctional because sometimes when I say attack hierarchy, it gives the impression that I'm a bit of an anarchist. But everywhere I have worked, the first thing that I try to do is to compress the management layers, is to attack the culture of hierarchy that I call dysfunctional, the so-called big man. There will always be organizational myths. I still remember the story when I got to Nigeria the first time and I walked into the organization and somebody came to take my bag and I said, it's a very light bag, you don't need to carry it for me. And I had so many people come to me and say, you don't understand the culture over here, you will offend people. And I said, whose culture exactly? Is it the culture of you, the big people? Or is it the culture of somebody who has to walk all the way to just come and drop a bag in my office and go back? And they said, no, you don't understand. Even the person will be offended. So I said, why don't we try this? Let's call the guy. So I called him. I said, do you really mind that I come out of a car and I take my own bag and go up? He says, no. I asked him, so why do you do it? He said, because I thought that's what you guys want to be done for you. So that's the reason why I do it. It's not only a Nigerian thing. Those who have read Francis Fukuyama's End of History and The Last Man would have come across what he called Havel's greengrocer. Havel was the prime minister of Czechoslovakia for a period of time, but before that, he was the lead dissident that fought against Stalinist oppression in Czechoslovakia. And he recounts a story. He said he was walking in the streets of Prague, and he went into a store, and there was this greengrocer, and on his door he had, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. So he asked the guy, what does this mean to you? And the guy said, it doesn't mean anything to me. He said, so why do you have it there? So because when the party people come around and they see it, they leave me alone. It doesn't need to mean anything to me, but I put it there, it makes them happy, and I'm on my own. And leaders in organizations can be in the same space very easily. If you don't get the dangers of dysfunctional hierarchy out, people very quickly start to say to themselves that this is a deity and this is how the deity likes to be looked at and this is how the deity wants to be handled. So the real conversations that are going on in the organization, you are exempt from it. And wherever I have worked, when you have gone after hierarchy, guess who are the people who complain the most? It's not the most junior people that say that the CEO comes down and always is talking to drivers and security men and so on and so forth. They are not the people who complain. In fact, they embrace you very easily if they find that you're sincere. It's always the most senior people in the organization. And even here in Nigeria, I had the same experience. And by the way, it was not all Nigerians. I had Europeans in my team. I had people from elsewhere in Africa. I had Indians and Pakistanis. They were the people who complained the most. And they kept saying to me, but when you talk to all these people, then you make us insecure. Why are you? And I said, why will you be insecure if you are telling me the truth? What do you expect me to find out that you have not already told me? So I don't mind if my global CEO is talking to my driver, or because whatever I tell him, that's what he's going to find out. So you have to go that road less traveled, stick to it, try to dismantle dysfunctional hierarchy. Eventually people accept that that's the way it's going to be, and eventually it builds a culture of transparency, and everybody benefits from it. This idea, in my view, of rigid, ritualistic way of emphasizing hierarchy in organizations is dangerous. It kills organizations. I think that people in leadership, if they want to be worshipped in that sort of way, they make an admission that they are adding no real value to the organization. If you're adding value to an organization, you are not really bothered about having to wear your position on your forehead or like a wristband so that everybody can see it. People know the value you're adding to the organization, and that's what must take you forward. So dysfunctional hierarchy, whether in the church, whether in the workplace, is absolutely essential. We all benefit and thrive from constant conversation because none of us has perfect knowledge. And the only way that you will ensure that conversations are sincere is if the asymmetries of power, that's the power you are holding and the power that the rest of the organization has, there is not too much disparity. Otherwise, people just start to say the things that you want. So the leader has that responsibility all the time to intervene, to dismantle those levers and signals of power that stop people from telling them the truth. And you have to be curious, and you are the one that has to engage. Put yourself in uncomfortable situations so that you can be part of the conversation. The other thing that causes, when we talk in terms of the challenges of corruption and so on, one of the things, when you think through it, that leads people to make mistakes, we talk a lot about greed, but what is it that causes greed? A lot of the time is long-term fear. Fear of what you will do if you don't have more money, fear of what will happen to you if your boss does not approve of the way you do things, fear of what will happen if you lose your possessions and therefore your status in life is not what you would want it to be, and so on and so forth. And if I said that none of us ever experience fear, I would not be telling the whole truth. Nor do I believe that there is anybody that occasionally is not in doubt about something, does not have a certain degree of fear. But I'm talking about long-term fear here, where it becomes a condition that is perpetually with you because it's a paralyzing feature. Sometimes it's a fear of somebody who is seen to be dictatorial, a cruel boss, whatever. I have often said to people who say to me, why do you constantly say that you have to have courage and go ahead? And I say, if you say that you actually adhere to the Christian faith, I do not fully understand why you should live in long-term fear. Because if you're willing to submit to God through prayer, I really do not understand why you fear another human being to that extent. And that's my encouragement to people. That at the end of the day, what's the worst thing that is going to happen? So we must be exceedingly careful in organizations that the evaluation criteria that we use to make decisions are about the long term. In the short term, everything seems expedient. This is the problem with quarterly capitalism. Business leaders are now thinking constantly about how you're going to make the quarter's numbers. And in that process, they will do all sorts of things in order to be able to meet their numbers if you don't have the right values context. But it's when you start to think about the long term that you start to ask yourself questions. I'm breaching these controls. What happens if I am caught? I may get out of it, but what happens to my family? What happens to the reputation? What happens to the reputation of the organization long after I'm gone? It's when you start to think about fourth order consequences, fifth order consequences that you reflect properly. But if you allow yourself to get caught in fear, what happens is that the consideration is always about the here and now. There's possibly a sanction that's going to come from your boss if you don't do this. So you're thinking only about the here and now, and you take decisions that you should not take. So in my view, paralyzing fear is inconsistent with a deep faith. If it exists in the long term, is inconsistent with a deep faith. It does not mean that you will never experience fear. That will happen sometimes. Sometimes we wonder why things are happening. Sometimes I am also afraid of things. But in the long term, I will take the decision that is right. And for me, that's what the faith in God and that's what the faith in Christianity stands for. It is also fear, I believe passionately, that breeds greed in the end. It is fear in the end, the fear of losing something. You keep on piling. I see people, they have billions and billions, and they are still looking for more and more. And you ask yourself, do these people ever come to terms with the fact that one day they will not be here? They will leave all of this and move on to do something. And you get so consumed by your will to accumulate so much that you never lose that you no longer even have time. You know, people steal and steal, and now they put it in water tanks and they bury it in the ground, and you say, what's going on here? For me, it is fear that breeds greed at the end of the day, and that's why I've stayed on it for a period of time. But it's a subject that, of course, requires more time in order to be able to go on. Now, I've not spoken much about the mechanics of business and how you run things because I didn't think that's what we were really going to talk about. But I just wanted to touch on this subject of operational intensity in a non-linear world. And what I mean by a non-linear world is that if you live in these parts of the world, you live in what we call a VUCA reality. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. Things are always happening in ways that you don't expect them. That's one of the realities of places with fragile infrastructure. But these days, it is even the reality of the world all over. In those sorts of spaces, operational intensity is absolutely essential. Now, I tend to believe that a leader's cardinal role is to select the other people they will work with. No leader in the long term will be better than the team that they are working with. I believe this passionately. If you see people who say they are the people who make the team, they don't know what they're talking about. So the selection criteria, the people that you will work with, absolutely essential. And you have to make the tough decisions to choose the people with the right values, with the right skills, and the right competencies. When that has been done, the strategic choices, the strategic priorities need to be made. Those two are essential. But in my view, the third one, which is that the leader must conduct the operations with intensity, absolutely essential, particularly in our cultural circumstances. We're good at articulating strategy. You see it, even in our national life. Yeah? Very quickly we come up with a plan, and so on and so forth. Nobody buys a product because of a plan. Nobody comes to a church because of a plan. People, they watch and they acknowledge and they recognize what you do, and what you do emerges from an execution culture, and an execution culture is based on operational intensity. If we say we will do something, we do it. In simple ways, we review. We make sure that we have done it. If the outcome was not what we expected it to be, we try to interrogate. What went wrong? What have we learned from the process? Build it back into the plan so you have the feedback loop. We don't spend enough time on that. You can call it simply just basic project management skills. But people who get things done, often in life, they get ahead. It's just as simple as that. Those who get what they say they will do done, often in life, they get ahead. So operational intensity, absolutely essential, but particularly in a non-linear reality, you have to also think through all the time what are the likely and emergent scenarios. Because you cannot work with one scenario in places where you have fragile infrastructure. Power can go off in Nigeria. I used to say when I first came, I was worried about everything that happened. The port is down, you don't have trucks. When is all this going to blow away? I've come to terms with that. This is the way that it is. So the thing that you need to do is to identify those risks, and you plan for those risks. And you say to yourself that if power went off, how will you cater for it? If in going to this place at this particular time there's traffic, how will you cater for it? The day you start to say that Nigeria will not be Nigeria's excuse, Africa will not be Africa's excuse, you start to plan. And it's in planning for scenarios, is in getting a mindset of contingency, that there are possible outcomes, multiple outcomes, and planning for them, that you start to thrive in an environment like this, even when things are very difficult. To my mind, and I'm coming to the end now, leadership is like being a good shepherd. Nelson Mandela used to talk about this a lot, and you see that this is also derived very much from the ministry of Christ. Nelson Mandela used to say, leadership is situational. You cannot have, when he was asked the question, do you lead from the front or from the back? He says, you cannot always be at the front or always at the back. And he used an analogy of the good shepherd. If you are a shepherd and you are with lambs, and you are in these pastures where there's absolutely no risk, you leave the lambs to play. They roll in the grass, you go to the back. That's not the time when you're going to give them so many commands and try to control them all the time. At that stage, you disappear. You let them experiment. You let them experience life. You let them make some mistakes because it's a very safe environment. But as you start to emerge, if the risk profile goes up a bit, you say, okay, maybe I was very far back and they were playing around, so I come closer now so that if the more risque ones are doing things that can harm them, I can guide them. But if you get to a place where a lion now appears, threatening to eat 10 of them, it is not the time when the leader says, I go to the back and I'm going to coach. You go and face the lion, and if you are not killed, I will come first. The leader has to come to the absolute front. So when things are dangerous, when things are risky, when things have gone wrong, that's when leadership is required the most. That's when you take accountability. That's when you say, that's why I'm paid more than all of you. I'm here now. I will take the decisions. I will make the tough calls. When there's a lot of credit because things are going well, leave other people to take the credit. Because you are the leader, because you've already got some credit. So leave other people. And you create that sort of culture and environment where you are now building team and community. And that's what I mean by the leader being a good shepherd. It's an analogy that we must keep with us. Leadership is situational. And situations are not always constant. So you have to have a set of values that constitute your guardrails, but you must be flexible with your style. Depending on the circumstances, within the values context, you need to be able to adapt. Be humble. I hope everybody can see the screen. It's not easy, but let's be humble. I have said to people, the more you read, the more you know how much you have not read. The more you learn, the more you know how much you do not know. and it's a continuous exercise. Sometimes it's almost an article of frustration. You get the sense that you read so many things and you feel that you mastered the subject. But the more books you're reading, the more references are made, the more you know what you have not learned. And it's an ongoing thing. There's a new generation that is coming up, the way that they absorb technology, how they deal with it. If you are not open to always learning, no matter, and making it a lifelong experience, in no time you are outmoded, or you start to intimidate people with better sources of knowledge. I came across a clip on YouTube that I like. I don't know whether you can all see it. And I thought that it was illustrative of what I was trying to say, that people come into contact with new technologies and so on and so forth, and still try to do things, and some of the funny things that emerge from it.
What is raining today? Water.
Yeah.
Oh my God, answer! It said yeah.
You say yeah.
Yeah, it's her.
Oh my God. It's a woman?
Yeah.
I'm glad to meet
What
you.
is this thing?
Hello, Gugu.
Hey, you're okay.
That's something from the
Google.
Alphabets.
You have to say, hey, Google, or okay.
Hey, Gugu. Okay, Gugu.
What's the
There you go.
weather?
Yeah.
What's the weather, ask?
What the weather? You want to know what is the weather
Tomorrow.
tomorrow?
In Flagler Beach tomorrow, there will be showers with a high of 65 and a low of 56.
With this, it's a mystery.
Watch it there.
I'm scared. I'm scared. It's a mystery. Oh my gosh. No.
Ask Google to play an Italian song.
Cuckoo. Hi, cuckoo.
You have to say, hey, or okay.
Hey, okay.
Google.
Tomorrow in London, it'll be sunny with a high of 41 and a low of 30.
Hold it for a moment, eh?
It's the temperature in London.
Mom, I asked her to play your favorite song.
Play your favorite song.
Cuckoo. Cuckoo.
Yeah, you're cuckoo, all right.
Cuckoo. Play a song for me. Piemontesina bella.
You have to say.
Addio dei giorni passati. Addio.
So, okay, you don't have to tap it first. But to wake it up, you have to either say, hey.
I think you get the point that I'm trying to make, that the world is changing around us. It's important that we stay open to what is going on. And I suppose that's where I would like to leave it and then take the questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
I was lost inside the desert fortress circling round my head, but thanks to God now I made it out of there. I was just another sheep inside the belly of the beast, but thanks to God now.
I'm not sure that round of applause was for, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. So I found myself scribbling away so hard. I'm not sure I can read things that I wrote. But I'm going to try to recap a few of the points that I heard. Just a few. So we started with faith defines your values. Yaw told us we should do things for the long term. Think about tomorrow for sustainability. We should define for ourselves what impact is, what our purpose is. He asked us to make sure that we have a multi-stakeholder approach where every actor derives value. He told us that governance is built on systems and processes, not individuals. Now, for me, that stuck out. It's really, really stuck out because you mentioned corporate governance, and I know that textbook definition is that corporate governance is systems and processes that define, drive companies. But what happens with someone who runs a bakery by himself, for himself, and his help is his wife, and they employ someone who lives with them and has come from the village? What kind of systems and processes will they need in a bakery, for instance? Where's the governance in there?
Well, there's a huge amount of governance. First of all, I started my career in manufacturing. So first of all, you can have some bakeries, and I've seen this, where you go and the lead actor in the ecosystem that is the bakery has perhaps built a reputation for being a great baker. The techniques that they use are not explicitly articulated anywhere. They like the fact that they are the only person that can come and finish things in a way, and then one day the person falls ill, the whole thing collapses. So simple things like putting a book there, what you do, what are the temperatures, etc. For me, all of those are systems, and all of that is part of governance. It is not unknown. You talked about a man and his wife. It is not unknown that you have these sorts of businesses and 30% of the money is stashed somewhere. The wife doesn't know. She has no clue what is the true revenue, because the guy says that I have to put some money aside for beer with the boys. Yeah, so the degree of sophistication of the tools and the processes and the systems will differ. But the principle of that you can systematize anything in that biosphere, that has to be upheld.
I just wanted to point out that corporate governance is not just for corporates. It's for every business, no matter how small, no matter how big. Now, while we're going through these like 5 minutes of recap, I'd like us to have some microphones that are roving amongst the audience so we can capture questions. We will take 3 questions at a time. Yaw will respond, and then we'll take another set of 3 questions. So do we have any questions right now? There's a hand up here in front. So we'll take 3 questions, a set of 3 questions. Yaw will respond, and then.
I love what my brother said, that people want to take his bag, and he didn't allow it. It happened to me when I was in Switzerland. I wanted to take the books from my president, and he said, "No, don't you have anything to do?" Then I said, "That is how we do in Nigeria." He said, "When you get back to Nigeria, go and do that." But now we find even pastors. Somebody will help them carry Bible to the pulpit, and then they will follow. Even when they are coming down, the Bible is even too big for them to bring down. So how can we correct that? Because I think the example must come from the church.
Next question, please.
Good evening, sir. Thanks for the lecture. It's very innovative. On the issue of disruptive hierarchy, you were of the opinion that we should bring down systems and make it more. Is it not kind of encouraging bureaucracy? We already have bureaucracy in our society that impedes progress. The leadership, by example, in which you concentrate power in someone that is more effective, because even the people themselves, they are not articulate. Like you said about sheep, somebody has to have a vision, the direction in which the company goes or that business goes, even the country. So there has to be an investor, a mentoring system in which people of similar capacity come up. Instead of the disruptive hierarchy you are kind of, you are more for from what you said.
And the final question for this set.
Good evening. Thanks for the lecture, really expository. You mentioned something about meritocracy in the organization. And, I think meritocracy is not necessarily democracy, like meritocracy for what it is. And you also give the example of having an appointment forum for making some decisions in terms of promotions and appointments. So my question is that sometimes as a leader, you have to just make some gut call. Like, this person is actually qualified for this job, but may not be popular in terms of having the forum to make a decision. How do you balance the fact that you have to operate that kind of meritocratic system and the fact that you have to just make some gut calls on some decisions sometimes? So finding that balance between making decisions as a leader, because at the end of the day, it's your call. You have to make that gut call. So how do you balance that, making that decision and having a system in place where you have to still follow the processes, and so finding that balance can be...
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the questions are kind of related, so I'll not try and take them one by one, because It's the perennial discussion between is Africa ready for democracy or not? Maybe a more dictatorial model it will work more in the African context. And I say to people, but Africa has not had a shortage of dictatorship. I mean, there's Abacha, there's Idi Amin. We can go on and on and on and on. The key thing when you say that you need to create space for the leader to take a decision, otherwise he relies too much on systems and it can become a bureaucracy. It assumes that the leader is always right, and the leader is not always right, number one. Number two is that corporate governance is not incompatible with strong leadership. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be decisive, but you have to be decisive within a framework. That's the point that we are making over here. To ensure that even the most powerful person in the system, there are some basic rules, guardrails within which you are making the decisions. Now, when you have rules, other people may try to play around with them, use them to slow down things in the organization. That's the leader's role then, to say, no, these are the rules that we have made for us, so this is what we will stick to. And the best way to illustrate that is just to use the macro context. Is a country better off with the constitution or without it? I argue that it's better with the constitution because it articulates the principles by which we say we will live. The constitution is not a perfect document, but at least we are able to say if the presidency does something that is against what we have all agreed, we are able to stand up and say we use this to challenge it. The organizations are similar, and it's usually people at the top who are looking for ways and who say that things are bureaucratic and so on. My experience has been that when you articulate the rules clearly, when the organization sees that the leaders live by those articulated rules, because the culture of an organization is not what the leaders say they will do, it's what they do. That's what is going to cause the culture, and that's how I answer my senior brother's question. That we can talk about not liking things and saying you don't want people to carry your bag and so on. The organization will always know what the leaders truly believe because they are watching. And it's not what they say. So my simple way of looking at it is that I'm not asking for weak leadership. Even if I say it myself, I don't see myself as such. That I'm weak. If a decision has to be made, I will make it. But there are very clear rules. And I'm very clear what I can do and what I cannot do. And because there are controls in place, there are some things that I alone cannot sign. The finance director has to sign. So if I want to do something untoward, I have to think about that. This thing is going to go to the CFO. What's that person going to think? If I turn it on its head and in the interest of expediency, I start to say that I'm faster, I cut out bureaucracy, I'll do everything myself, you will get some short-term consequences that are good. But believe me, the organization will eventually fail on governance because there is no one who is always right. Absolutely no one.
Okay, I'm going to take us back to the presentation and the multi-stakeholder approach. Now, for Unilever and for you, Yaw, beyond profits, how do you measure impact? How does Unilever make impact on its environment, on the community, beyond having a focus towards profit, and how is it going to benefit us and then benefit them as well?
Well, we define what we do, the impacts according to people, planet, and profits in that order. I mean, Unilever has come out and made a big statement that we are decoupling our growth from our impact on the environment, which means that any adverse impact on the environment, we need to start to take out of our system. There's a very clear commitment through what we call the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. Now, I'm now talking in terms of global, but when I come to the African condition, I have to contextualize that. One of the key and major drivers of many of the adverse impacts on the environment and so on is, for example, poverty. So in my context, I have prioritized job creation. How do we create jobs? We create jobs when we grow. That's what we need to focus on, develop markets, make sure that the volume throughput is coming up. In the last 3 years or so, we have added 7,000 jobs to our distribution chain in a period of recession. if you count our key distributors and so on and so forth. That's because our volumes have shot up 31%. As a result of that, our suppliers have benefited, communities have benefited because people who are working in them move to income levels that give them dignity, etc. So you will see that I don't talk about impact on communities as if it's the thing that you do after business. That's the problem that I have with the CSR conversation, that when you finish doing business, then you pay some guilt money and you go away. I think about how you're going to make an impact on community as the very key element of how you unlock models in the marketplace in the first place. So you take, let's use Nigeria as an example. Anemia is an endemic issue. So we've put iron in our bouillon cubes so that you have more iron coming into the food chain and you're tackling, therefore, some of the problems of anemia. If some of the problems of anemia are tackled, you have a more healthy population. If there's a more healthy population, they are going to consume more. So it's good for business as well. So we call it enlightened self-interest. And I'm not embarrassed to say you do this, it's good for business, but it's also good for the community. And you kickstart a virtuous cycle.
Okay. After this question, we'll come back to the audience and then we'll take another set of 3. So you mentioned a VUCA world. Violent, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. How does should the question be how or what role does your Christian faith or has your Christian faith played in helping you navigate this really VUCA environment in Nigeria and Ghana? Very corrupt, yes, very corrupt environments that you've been dealing with.
That's why I started out by saying that your values come from your faith. And it's easier for me. I'm in a global business, I acknowledge it. I was saying to a colleague, no politician will ever come to me and ask me for campaign donations. You know, I just simply can't do it. So I know that it's easier for me. But it is true what I said before, institutionalizing systems, decreasing the discretionary power. If I want to do something, even though I'm a member of this church, if I want to do something for this church, there's a very clear governance process that I have to go through and make sure that I have argued out why it is necessary for the organization. It's not a simple matter of I just stand up and say, let's do this. So within the volatility of the environment, the fact that we have placed those guardrails diminishes the temptation that the short-term pressure on me will cause me to yield in some ways. Now, in order also in a volatile environment not to feel the pinch too much, you need to think, and that's what I have learned the most in Nigeria, because this is a very complex environment. You need to think through very carefully how you set up your business systems. And if I have learned the role of redundancies in operations is in Nigeria, I have seen it most. I recognize that sometimes I will go to the port and the port has collapsed. If here I am trying to do something about negative working capital, which is what all business schools teach and you see in all the textbooks, then when I can't get things out of the port, there's a temptation now to say, gosh, I'm out of this for 6 months. How are we going to facilitate and get it out of the port? That's when you start to think about, should you bribe somebody, should you do this? The other way of thinking about it is to say, I recognize that this is a risk in this environment. It's just like if I take this church, for example, if we built it in Singapore, there will be no generators. It's because you recognize that there is a risk, you put a generator there. 2 are here, and maybe a 3rd one soon, I don't know. But you recognize that risk, which means that the pastor doesn't come and say, have we paid this amount of money to NEPA? Because you've taken your fate into your hands a little bit. And so you don't have to go and try and override the systems that exist. And when I think about things that we have done differently in Nigeria, there are many along those sorts of lines. You build, you identify the risk realistically. Don't be romantic about the environment, realistically. Can a Papa pot go down? Yes, it can go down. Today, as I speak, we can't get trucks to cart goods. That's a possibility in Nigeria. So I itemize those lists of risks and I say, if this happens, what are the options? Have we built them in? Eventually, it may seem like you're putting a little bit more cost in the system, but if you look at it over the long term, configuring your system like that actually gives you efficiency in an environment like this.
All right. Thank you. Can we have a set of 3 questions from this side now?
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, sir. My name is Israel Adeniran. I'm very glad to listen to your presentation this evening. My question is about how can an organization be able to make impact that will have direct benefit on the society? Looking at the contribution of the government where the organization is existing in. Because we know so well that there are a lot of policies and programs that can be put out by the government that can have some influence on the organization. Now, for that organization to now be able to actualize their identified plan to contribute towards the society, to give back to society, how can an organization be able to achieve that? Coming from the angle of the influence of the government. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, sir. My name is Jennifer Ochendu. I'm a sustainability professional. I have two questions, actually. One is a personal one. You said something about don't give in to long-term fear. So what about short-term fear in the face of apprehension and anxiety, especially if you're an intentional person and you've always gotten the job done before now? What happens when you get to that place and it's a really big challenge? What do you do with that short-term fear? A lot of inspirational talks say face your fears, do what you have to do, but what's the real and relatable thing to do? And the second question from the sustainability side is, I've gone through a lot of certificate programs, and Unilever Global is like the giant when it comes to sustainability work, but we don't see Unilever Nigeria communicate a lot of work they're doing on the sustainability side. So sometimes I try to convince myself that, oh, Unilever is doing a lot, because I worked in Unilever many years ago, but we don't see it communicate. Is it intentional not to communicate it, or is it like a strategy?
So we actually have three questions.
Three questions, I was going to say.
Okay, let's have the fourth one. It's okay.
Good evening. My name is Daniel Ayuba, and my question might not follow the lead others are taking, although it has some bearing with what you pointed out earlier about fears. So my case is I want to start up a company, and it is taking me from the inception of the ideas and the rest of the like plays I counted out a few days ago, and it's already going like 3 years down the line. Of course, there are a lot of challenges, and fear is a very serious factor in all what I've just mentioned. So how do I really, put myself together and face this supposed fear? And of course, like I mentioned, a lot of challenges, resources, resources being one of the major factors. So how do I really scale through? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot in the questions that came, so let me try and dispense with the ones that are easiest to dispense with first. One is the conversation around government impact on business and so on. I tend to come from the school of thought that no people on earth have ever achieved sustained prosperity without a competent state. So the notion that the private sector can do it by itself and so on and so forth is a neoliberal notion that I do not subscribe to. There is no example in modern history of people who have done it only through the private sector. I think the private sector plays a complementary role. And therefore, leaders of business have to be in the conversation about the things that you do to make a competent state, recognizing that the state will play the role, if the state is competent, of a fair umpire, because businesses also have their own interest and so on, so the state cannot do everything that they look for. So we spend a lot of time talking. Even this morning I was with the vice president, talking to people, trying to make constructive critiques, give direction, serving on, you heard them when they were introducing me, boards and so on and so forth. And that's why the whole idea of a multi-stakeholder approach is very important. You cannot walk into a place like Nigeria and say all that matters is shareholder interest. This is not the Wild West. There's a government, there are regulators. You need to speak with them, and we need to be in constant conversation. It can be frustrating, times they don't move as fast as we want them, but it is better that we are in that constant conversation, and that's what, in my view, a democratic context gives better. And that engagement has to be done transparently, because otherwise you yield to the temptations of state capture. Some people become too influential and they rig the process to themselves. Now, two questions came up on fear. And fear is not an easy subject. So I'm not going to talk and just face your fears and run away and so on and so forth. My personal way, when I'm faced with short-term fears, is first to articulate for myself what I know to be my purpose. You have to take a step back and really say to yourself, why are you in this in the first place? Secondly, I believe very much in the power of having networks that you can rely on when there are difficulties. There are people that you go to and that you can be sincere and vulnerable and say, this is what I am facing. I think that you've had this experience before. What's the advice that you will give to me? 2 or 3 people, but eventually you're going to have to make your own decision. And the last one that I will say to you will probably come as a surprise to you. I think we are now living such stressful lives that we do not recognize that the time for introspection has decreased significantly. Yeah? This is an always-on world, 24/7. The smartphone connects us to everything. Therefore, the amount of thinking time that emerges from that, you're just sitting and you're thinking about possibilities and scenarios and sometimes answering questions before they emerge. If you are intentional and deliberate, that's what I will encourage that you do. Time to study, time to reflect on things. If this happened, what will you do, and so on. They usually prepare you for scenarios when they do emerge, because you would have thought through it before. And related to that is that I also think, and in the workplace I talk about it, and I'm not saying I am perfect at it, but I also think that the whole thing about health and well-being is crucial. People getting enough sleep, eating properly, exercising, it puts you in a situation where you are better able to face difficulty. And the medical officers like Dr. Etiet can tell you much more about that than I can. But I'll leave it at that. These for me are practical issues. This is how I deal with it. Yes, the high level, face your fears and so on are important, but also recognizing in life that sometimes we will make a mistake. Sometimes we will do things that don't work. That's very important, because I had a perfectionist streak in there, that you always want to get results, etc. At some point in my career, I was like that. You want everything to work. I now recognize that if enough things work, but some things fail, I can still be very successful. So I'm relaxed about that. Is there something I left out because there were many? Which one?
So why doesn't Unilever communicate?
Okay, yeah, very simple. I think I have to take responsibility for that, because when I came to Nigeria, I did say, I really want to see that these things are making real impacts in the society before we go out shouting about that we're doing this or we're doing that. And maybe we've got the balance wrong now. We have made a lot of progress. The things that we talk about globally, there were issues that we worked on for years before we started to speak about them. I am very careful about corporate PR that is just meant to give us a good name, that doesn't really have an impact on the ground. So we've been doing more than we've been saying, as a charge that I take, and perhaps we should get the balance right. I take the feedback.
Okay, so now I'm coming from the last question about wanting to start your own business. So you didn't start your own business, but you did transition from being a chemical engineer to a business leader. How did that happen? That's one. Tied into that is, what active steps did you take in the course of your career to position yourself, to rightly position yourself to seize opportunities?
Yeah, the first one, I know that you would expect some very intelligent answer about how it happened, but I don't have one. It's just simply that the vice chairman of my organization at that time thought that I had skills and competencies that would work well in marketing. So he called me and asked me whether I was interested. I said, yeah, I want to do it for 2 years, and then I will see whether this is really what I want to do. But after 2 years, I decided I wanted to pursue a marketing career. And that's how my engineering and marketing career came together to get me into general management. Positioning yourself, I have to say, when I left university, I said to myself that I believe that anybody who went to university, if they wanted to make a first class, could make it. That's what I said to myself. But those who made it were the people who gave it their best. And usually when I meet young people when they join the organization, I ask them, I'm sure you know the feeling of that you write your exams, you get the results, and you say to yourself, I know I could have done better, and it's a very painful experience when especially the results are not great and you know that you could have given. So I did say to myself on my first day of work that on my last day of work, one day when I retire or whatever, I would not want to say that I know I could have done better. Yeah, I will give it my best, and wherever it gets me, that's where it gets me. But I do want to say to myself that I know that I did the very best, and that has been my sort of guidelight. Deliberately positioning myself, etc., has not been my style. I would say that I do work hard, but I also play hard, I like to think. I learn from everybody. Everybody, I mean, you know, whoever you talk to somewhere, they know something that you don't know. So I try to learn from everybody. And I've never been afraid to put my view on the table. I worked for a guy called Harish Manwani at some point, I asked him that question because he was a living legend in Unilever. I said, how did you get where you are? And he said, I discovered very early in my career that nobody will kill you because you have a point of view. But a lot of the time, our own courage fails us because of the consequences. And he said, and because of that, I realized that I took decisions and took risks that other people would not take. And some of them failed, but the ones that worked, they catapulted me. Yeah.
Okay. Now, riding on the back of that, what's your definition of success? And I need to say this very carefully, since there was a portion on humility. Most people will say you are successful, right? But how do you stay not complacent? What keeps you on your toes? What always drives you back to realizing there's more? What keeps you on your toes? So what's your definition of success, and then
definition of success for me is individualized. My own definition of success is that I'm at peace in the deepest sense of the word. And if I'm happy and I'm at peace, then enough is for me. That's the way that I have always looked at it. I don't think that I've seen many very senior people whose lives I would not want because it's broken in so many ways. So that I'm at peace, that my family is at peace, that they're happy, we have enough, we don't want too much from it, I tend to be okay with that. Not staying complacent comes from always wanting to do your best. And I'm going to cite a source that you perhaps don't expect. I had the opportunity to spend a long time with JJ Okocha. Everybody here must know Okocha, otherwise you're not Nigerian, right? Yeah. And he said something to me that stuck with me. He said, at the very time that I knew I could not give my best, I decided to quit football. And I said, wow, that's quite interesting. He said, yes, because many people say that I'm skilled and I used to do, and when you watch the clips, you know Okocha was an extremely skilled footballer. But he said, I never actually went onto the field thinking I was skilled, but I played with everything that I had. So if you wanted to take a ball from me, if I had to put it on my neck to try and get it away from you, I'll do it. It's later that I will watch and then people say, wow, he did that style. But at the very moment, it was not a style. I was doing something out of necessity. Now, I encourage the same attitude in business, that sometimes you sit down and people say, you have achieved this and achieved that, and you look and you're thinking, wow, did you really do that? Because you know that if you were to be extremely deliberate about planning it, you may not have come up with it by yourself. That's why I also believe in the power of teams, in the context of teams and so on. Because history, as we tell it, tends to be individualized. So when things go well, we tend to say one person turned the business around. But I think we all, as we grow older, know that's not true. Many people make contributions throughout many things. And my role is to give my best. And the more that I build my capability, the more that I build my skill, the more that I build my capacity, the higher the threshold of the best must go. And when I get to a point where, when my father turned 70, let me use that example as well, he was a university professor. He said suddenly that he would no longer speak about his field publicly. I was surprised because he had emerged as an authority in his field in Ghana and elsewhere. And I asked him, I said, why will you no longer speak? He says, I'm no longer working as hard as I was when I was younger. And I recognize that therefore I'm not at the top of my game. I need to leave the space now for other people. Because otherwise, one day, somebody will dismantle my entire reputation because I have not read the latest stuff about it. And it's something that I keep in my mind. Give your best at the things that you do. The young people in my organization, what I tell them is that you cannot be good at everything. So choose the things that are important to you, a few of them, and give your best. Where it takes you, that's where it takes you. So long as you are happy and you are at peace, who is to define what success is for everybody? It's not money for everybody. People who are close to me know that I've always said I will never be a billionaire because if I had $500 million, I'd stop working. I go and do other things that interest me. So, not that being a billionaire, there's anything wrong with it, but everybody has a different definition of success. So when I see 90-year-olds with a net worth of 30 billion, bothering about whether the market is going up or not, I can't understand it. I say, what are they doing with this money? But we're all different. There may be other things that may... Okay. She says you may live to 120. If you have a 30 billion and you live my lifestyle, even if you live to 120, there'll still be a lot left. So I'd rather sit on the streets and watch birds.
Okay. Do we have questions on this side? Because I see there's still some hands up here. Okay. Can we have the microphone?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
My name is Ruben Bewe. In every organization, let's use Jesus Christ as our example. He has enemies. How do you handle enemies? Or do I explain more? There are some people that are not even, they will use sweet mouth or when they are in your front, but they are the other people at the other side. How do you handle that, sir?
No. Do we have questions on this side? So we have him.
Good evening, everyone. You've spoken to us from the position of a leader, which is your experience, about institutions and what have you. Building strong institutions rather than building powerful personalities. But now, I want to prick your brain. If you're not a leader, you're a middle-level manager, we're all leaders in one aspect or the other, in your home or whatever. But how do you cause a change in your little corner? You're not at the top there. You can't challenge hierarchy, you can't challenge institutions, but you want to effect these things that, most of these things we know, but how do you go around it?
One last question for this set.
Okay, when you said enemies, I know exactly what you mean, but I prefer the terminology non-performers. In the context of an organization, you have to define what performance is. We have what we call, in addition to the appointments forum, we have a people forum where all the directors of the organization sit down and we go through all the managers. And we spend a lot of time on this. Quarterly, we are going through each single one. But from a constructive point of view, wanting to help people, where are the gaps, where are the strengths that they must exploit more, what do we as leaders need to do for people? But unfortunately, sometimes people will drop through the net for whatever reasons. Sometimes because they're not applying themselves properly, sometimes because they're not just simply suited for that particular kind of environment. And that's where the point that was made about if you rely on systems, does it weaken the leader? That's when the leader has to be tough. The analogy I use in our organization is that organizations are like orchestras. The conductor of the orchestra plays no instrument. The other thing that the conductor of the orchestra knows is that the person who is playing the drum is not going to be able to compensate for the person who is playing the violin. And therefore, if the violinist is letting down the team, and yet everybody else is giving their best, but the output of the orchestra is not right, if the conductor is not able to replace the violinist, the conductor must be replaced. So that's when leadership comes in and you have to exert the accountability. And sometimes non-performance is because people don't have the skills. Sometimes it's simply because they don't fit the values of the organization anymore. And you have to make those tough calls and make sure that the team is being strengthened, being groomed and grown in the values context that everybody has agreed. In your small corner, the second question that was asked, my encouragement is always to look at your circle of influence. If you say you're in a small corner, try and do something in that small corner first. Often you have somebody in the small corner who's trying to solve the problems between Trump and Putin. And then you're not going to make any impact at all because you're trying to boil the ocean. But sometimes what we consider to be small can trigger major change because it's a model of excellence. So while you may be in the middle, and to some extent that's the most difficult place to be in an organization, because those below you are looking to you for leadership. You are not sure yourself whether you have the authority and the empowerment to be able to do it. So you have to have navigation skills about how to manage stakeholders, but how to keep those who are coming after you also inspired. It's not simple. I'm not undermining the importance of the question that you asked. It's not a simple thing. But my encouragement is start from that small corner. And be confident that if you make change in multiple small corners, eventually the entire system will start to improve. So you have to stick with it and not be frustrated.
Okay. So, do you feel a sense of responsibility to guide and nurture other younger professionals?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. On several levels. One is that we were guided. Nobody was born a CEO. We were all born naked. So one is that we owe that debt. From a moral point of view, we do. Secondly is that coaching and mentoring are very important for maintaining the talent pipeline. So I've now lost count of the number of people that I mentor, but I say to the HR system, I've never said no to anybody. Sometimes some of the requirements are such that you will not be able to meet them, but being out there, sharing your experience and your skills, and your failings, because I think that young people these days hear a lot about people's successes, but not about things that they have struggled with. And sometimes what they need most in order to be able to cope with some of the short-term anxieties that were being asked is for people to humanize success. Because we can make ourselves, all of us, look like we are so extraordinary, but we all know that we've had our battles and our struggles. So taking the platforms and sharing those sometimes encourages people beyond what we recognize.
Now, in those conversations with the younger professionals, what kind of skills, what kind of traits do you ask them to nurture and exhibit over others?
One is that focus on execution. In this part of the world, this is a real issue. I used to think that it was a small issue until recently I met the chairman of the Africa Union. I was fortunate to be on a panel with him. And he was talking about it as a continental problem. The failures in execution, he described it as a pure failure of mindset. He said he was so intense about it, and then at some point he turned and said, this cannot be only a public sector problem. Do you also see it in the private sector? So I said, yes, absolutely. So that focus on doing what we say we will do, I think will make a big difference if young people could focus on that. But not just young people, our entire system. I think we know this. We say we will do something, you can't go to bed. Here, and when I was in Kenya and in Ghana, I was called a stickler for time and that I was too strict on time and so on. When I worked in Singapore and London, nobody ever described me as that. If we said something was starting, everybody was there. You didn't have to chase people. So those basic disciplines, that's essential. So that's the main thing. I think the other thing I tell young people is that just recognize that we all made mistakes. We were all young ones. Whatever we have achieved, they can achieve and achieve much more. So they should be courageous. Go out there, try things. You will fail sometimes, but it doesn't matter. If you learn from it, you become a better person.
Okay. I mean, rounding up, there are a couple of things that I wanted to, I don't know if the word would be highlights. Now, Yaw told us to, so he just mentioned focusing on execution. And in his presentation, he talked about operational intensity. And he mentioned 3 different elements to that. Choosing the right people with the right competencies and having a leader who, executes as well. But yes, we will choose the right people who have the right competencies, but we need to be the right people as well. We need to be the right people. We need to stop thinking of governance or leadership as something someone else should be doing. Governance is with us. Governance is in the church, and is in the home, and is in your businesses, in your organizations that you work for, in the organizations that you will create, in the organization that you will set up one day very soon when you finally key into all the right connections. And my final comment, I'm going to make it a comment. My final comment, I was going to make it a question, but I'll let you make your final comment. Will be for us to have a new mindset. He's talked about culture, he's talked about governance, he's talked about leadership, but all of these things start in our minds. They start in our minds, and unless we have a mindset towards, it will be difficult to execute or achieve.
Yeah, so much has been said, so I'm not exactly sure what I should say as a last comment, but I think I probably go to where OM started it all, that if we are Christians, we need to be the salt of the earth, and that's not just about a constrained set of values. People should see the excellence that we spoke about come through us. There was a guy who was an auto company leader. He turned around with his team, an Italian company, then they bought an American company, and everybody said he had overextended himself and that he would fail. But they succeeded because he was focused on doing something for his people. And when he did it and they asked him, how do you feel? He said, Lazarus is risen. I think that's the best opportunity that we all have. There are many conditions around us that we are not proud of. In our own small ways, if we start every day to do something about it, the sense that we can affect the totality will be higher. And all of us can then pronounce to the world that Lazarus is risen. And I think that's what I want to say.
I think that if I said thank you, it wouldn't be enough. So maybe if we got a round of applause. Thank you so very much. This has been.
Thank you.
Was here.
He is.
Bolan, so what's your stress, man? Come out. And come and do your job, eh? And I also see Funke Atonda, Tunde, Olaleye, our team leaders that are here. Where are we? Team leaders that are here. Oma Mofe. Come, put live. Eh? Please. Before we all join to thank you.
Okay, on behalf of the planning committee of the Business and Career Fair, we'd like to thank our guest Yaw Nsarkoh for a very insightful talk, both from a business perspective, but also from a very personal perspective as well. I think we definitely learned a lot from everything he said, and I think we're glad to have him as a member of the church. So follow-on questions will come on Sunday, so please don't shy away from us if we come to you. Thank you to our moderator, Shalua Fajobi, for doing an excellent job to bring out some interesting questions. And of course, thank you to the audience who asked some very excellent questions and allowed Yaw give even more deeper insight into some of the things he had in his presentation. Thank you for coming, and we wish you a safe journey back home, and we hope we will see you here tomorrow, Saturday, for exhibitions. We also have master classes all day tomorrow, And on Sunday, we have even more speakers who will be talking about their own experiences in business. One of them is right here, Mrs. Ogunjimi. And for the first service on Sunday, in the second service at 11 a.m., we'll have an excellent panel of speakers which are lined up here. 4 speakers on Sunday. So if you think today was good, Sunday will be even much better. So please join us tomorrow and on Sunday. Thank you for coming.
Okay, so you see, there is something. This leadership is about all the beautiful people, and we are grateful to all of you for making Shalewa and Yaw do this for us. Thank you so much, Yaw. I appreciate it. And his family is here. I saw the lovely wife and the 2 gentlemen. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Tomiwa, thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate you. So thank you, sir. Thank you. Closing prayer. No. Reverend Adeleke will tell me who will give the closing prayer. I can see Reverend Mrs. I saw Reverend Mrs. too. She did. Okay. Okay, I'm told that the Reverend Dr. Adegboyega. Okay, so you also have the opportunity, Reverend Doctor. You can even ask your question whilst you are praying, and then you continue the conversation with him thereafter. Please come forward. Please. You know the irony. He was about to step out, and I accosted him. Reverend, you can't do this now. And thank God, Reverend Adeleke is in the spirit. So, and I've told Yaw, and he says he will have some conversation with you there. Please step up, sir. Step up, sir. No. Reverend.
Good evening, church. Please let's rise as we pray together. Eternal Father, I want to thank you for tonight. We give you praise, honor, and adoration for this meeting. Be exalted in the name of Jesus. Thank you for your son who has anchored the program. Thank you for his insight. Thank you for the grace to articulate himself and to impact the audience of a truth we have learned. We return all glory unto you in the name of Jesus. Lord God of hosts, we are praying you will increase him in grace and wisdom in the name of Jesus. Lord God, in his own career, he will not be disgraced. Lord God, he will finish strong. He will finish well. We use him as a point of contact to his institution where he's a stakeholder and a leader, that they will continue to excel. In the marketplace, they will continue to have impact. Glorious impact indeed. And while he lasted in that office, we pray greater things he will accomplish in the name of Jesus. Lord, we want to pray for this career team, that as they organize this meeting on a yearly basis, they will continue to work stronger. We are praying that your church will be better for it. Nigeria will be better for it. Thank you, Eternal Father. We commit tomorrow's meeting to your hand, O God, that it will be greater. And when we meet on Sunday, of a truth, we will return all glory unto you. Thank you, our Father. In Jesus' name we have prayed. Praise the Lord. Let's share the grace in unison. Be with us now and forevermore. Surely, grace and mercy shall follow us all the days of our lives, and we shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever and ever. Amen. Praise the Lord.